Here we are at part 2 for the other side of the issue. Those who say that Stickel's archaeological investigation did not supply evidence that is sufficient to demonstrate tunnels and a secret room below the McMartin school building. By the way, Stickel's report was not accepted as evidence in court. Why? I am using primarily 2 documents to support this side of the issue. One is a long, multi-chapter article from the Institute for Psychological Therapies by John Earl. It is called The Dark Truth About the Dark Tunnels of McMartin. The second one is called What Was Under the McMartin Preschool? A review and behavioral analysis of the tunnels find by Dr. Joseph Wyatt. This is from Behavioral Issues number 12, 2002. I am also including some of my own analysis of this issue. Both Earl and Wyatt had access to the entire 186-page report from Dr. Stickel, something that we don't have because it has not been made publicly available and has not been leaked to any online source that I know of. As I noted in the previous video, there were 2 professional archaeological investigations performed on the McMartin property. We are excluding the amateur attempts conducted by the parents. Before the Stickel crew dug underneath the school, an archaeological firm called Scientific Resource Surveys Incorporated, SRS, was hired by the DA. One of the things that Earl writes about is the procedure used by the professionals at SRS and compares it to the Stickel report. The SRS operation was conducted in the manner that an objective study ought to be conducted. The Stickel crew did nothing of the sort. First of all, Stickel was hired by the parents who wanted to find evidence that could convict the McMartin staff of the crimes they were accused of. It is reasonable to say that Stickel was not hired to perform an objective archaeological study. He was hired to find tunnels below that school. He did what he was hired to do, and he said as much. According to the Earl article, Stickel gave some interview time to Earl, specifically to assist him in the writing of that article. Stickel responded to a question of his ethics regarding things he had said publicly with, "I'm not in the business of, quote, looking for the other side. I was just hired to do a job, and I did the job, and I made the report." Okay, in one of my previous videos, I discussed the questions that one might ask before investigating a subject, and asking the right question. The question that Stickel's crew was asked was, were there tunnels under the school that could be used as evidence against the defense in this trial? Which is not too far from, what can we find under this building that we can try to frame as evidence that can be used for the prosecution in this trial? An objective archaeological study must start with the question, what is under the building? Nothing more. No preconceived expectations at all. In light of this, the list of criteria that Stickel established for the dig could only yield the results of a seriously flawed study. The word or the phrase and/or appears in 6 of the 9 criteria, specifically for the purpose of leaving more than one option available to meet those criteria. Of the 3 that do not contain the or and/or clauses, one contains the phrase could be and another contains the phrase may be, leaving the options of could not be and may not be. In the case of criterion 6, the tunnel could be open, i.e. traversable and unfilled. It turns out that the discoveries met the could not be option, and the conclusion reads 6. The tunnel was found not open. That leaves one of the 9 criteria that stipulated only one option that must be present. That criterion is number 5, which states 5. There should be a compacted dirt floor, compacted by human foot traffic, distinguishable from surrounding non-tunnel soil, which should not be compacted. Aside from this, the fact that this criterion assumes the existence of the tunnel in the first place, I'll let that slide just because none of the criteria are an acceptable foundation for objective research. In the conclusion for this stipulation, it merely states that the feature had a compacted floor. Did we forget about the part of compacted by human foot traffic? For some reason, those words are parenthesized in Stickel's text. Nowhere in the summary does it describe the method for determining if the compaction was due to human foot traffic, or how much traffic, or how recent, etc. I could go on, but rather than continue to geek out on the criteria, let's move along. Okay, according to Earl, Stickel's report leaves out pertinent information that was clearly stated in the SRS report. For example, the fact that the space was used for a trash dump prior to the construction of the school. This gives a definitive explanation for most of the artifacts that were discovered in both of these digs. The SRS report states that there was a house, a garage, and a greenhouse on the property before the school was built. The Stickel report ignores all public information to the contrary and states that the first construction on the preschool lot was the Virginia McMartin preschool itself. The shortest chapter in John Earl's article on the McMartin tunnels is the one about Stickel's archaeological methodology. The entire chapter reads as follows. It is impossible to fully evaluate Stickel's archaeological methodology because the largest part of the descriptive outline is missing from the present author's copy of the report. Mr. Hobbs, who kindly presented me with a copy of his report, says that his version came without the crucial page. Dr. Roland C. Summit's copy of the report, which this writer was allowed to briefly thumb through, was also missing a page. The missing contents may be the greatest remaining tunnel mystery. That's the chapter. Earl also lists problems with the photographs in Stickel's report. Many of the items that should have been shown in situ, meaning in the exact location in which they were discovered, were not shown in situ. A proper archaeological report would require that. Many of the photographs were too dark to determine what the subject of the photograph is. And there are photographs that do not show what the documentation claims they show. Now let's look at the evidence that the Stickel crew did obtain from this dig. I'm going to be looking primarily at Joseph Wyatt's 2002 article for this. There are 1,603 artifacts listed in the Stickel report. These items include animal bones from cow, pig, dog, rabbit, rodent, reptile, and other animals. There were numerous old bottles and cans, a pipe, 4 large containers filled with trash, wood scraps, metal scraps, nails, cinder blocks, scissors, eyeglasses, an inner tube, and more. All of these items were dated from 1890 through the 1950s, with the bulk of the items being from the 1920s through 1940s. Now, let's go back to Stickel's summary. The last 2 paragraphs of his introductory read as such. Both the contour signature of the walls and the nature of recovered artifacts indicated that the tunnels had been dug by hand under the concrete slab floor after the construction of the building. Whatever the purpose of this elaborate enterprise, even more effort must have been devoted to filling the tunnels back in and trying to conceal any evidence of their existence. Much of the fill dirt used for packing the tunnel spaces was mixed with historic debris, as if to mimic the surrounding terrain. Not only did the discovered features fulfill the research pre-qualification as tunnels designed for human traffic, there was also no alternative or natural explanation for the presence of such features. Really? No alternative explanation. How about this one from Dr. Wyatt? Stickel had found a family trash pit of the type that was and is often dug on the property of rural homeowners. Often such a pit is dug by hand. Old bottles, tin cans, table scraps, metal objects, and other trash are disposed of in the pit. Combustible refuse is sometimes burned in the pit. When the pit is nearly full, a new pit is dug in the space beside the first pit with its dirt used to cover the first pit. When the second pit is filled with trash, it is then covered with dirt as a third is dug, and so on. Over many years, a string of pits has been dug, each filled with trash and covered with a thin layer of soil. This string of covered pits might later give the appearance of having once been a tunnel. This most likely was the archaeologist's discovery. Well, that sounds like an alternative explanation to me. Which explanation seems more likely? There was some outside analysis done on some of the artifacts. The South Bay Antique Bottles and Collectibles Club dated the found bottles from the 1920s up to 1960, with most of them being from the 30s and 40s. An analysis was done on the bones, and the conclusion most of the bones were from adult chickens, pigs, dogs, birds, and cattle. Most of the bones showed signs of standard butcher's cuts. The so-called tunnel was a series of trash pits. So what about the items that Stickel presented as being made after the construction of the school building? The Disney sandwich bag dated 1982 could easily have been carried in by a burrowing rodent, as such items often are. Stickel actually provided that very thing as a probable explanation for a cellophane wrapper he discovered elsewhere on the site. Another explanation is that it could have been introduced to the site during the dig. The length of pipe that was found with newer-looking clips was discovered connected to a toilet close to the edge of the building where a hole could have been dug from the outside to repair that piece of plumbing. The mailbox labeled with the name and address, Stickel decided that it was thrown out around 1972 when that house was torn down. That's what he did. He just decided that. No evidence was given to provide a date for the box. It was a rural, roadside mailbox, a standalone structure. It could have been discarded and replaced at any time before the house was demolished. And this one was probably tossed because it had a broken off flag. And if all of the defendants had brought in fill dirt from another location to conceal the tunnels, how did that mailbox end up in that fill dirt along with other relics that were of the appropriate vintage to indicate a family trash pit? Where did they get the fill from? How did they transport all that fill into the spaces below the building unnoticed? How is it that they left absolutely no physical evidence of their presence in that space the whole time they were filling it in? Stickel's filled-in tunnel hypothesis would have to provide explanations for all of this. It was a series of trash pits. That covers it. No further explanations are necessary. Okay, now we're going to continue this in part 3.